Before Columbus, before Jamestown, before Plymouth Rock, there were the Vikings. Not in myth, not in folklore, but in the flesh, sailing longboats through icy Atlantic waters to reach the shores of what we now call North America. These North explorers, led by fearless leaders like Leif Ericson, touched the edges of a continent centuries before most school books began the American story. But what did they find? Wild grapes? Hostile tribes? Timber for ships? Or something even more surprising? And more importantly, what did they leave? This isn't just another tale of horned helmets and battle axes. It's the real, rugged, rain-soaked saga of the Norse in America. A tale of courage, trade, survival, and mystery. One rooted in evidence, archaeology, and awe. Strap in, because what the Vikings found in the New World might change how you see the beginning of America and the true scope of Viking ambition. Sailing into the unknown. Leif Ericson and the First Norse Voyages. Let's begin with a name you've heard, but probably don't know well enough. Leif Ericson. Not Leif the myth, Leif the trailblazer. Born around 970 CE in Iceland, Leif was the son of Eric the Red, the fiery founder of the Greenland colony. Vikings had already shown they weren't afraid to go further than any other Europeans of their time. They'd leapfrogged westward over treacherous seas from Norway to Iceland to Greenland. And then there came rumors of land even farther still. Bjarni Herjolfsson was the first to see North America, reportedly blown off course during a trip from Iceland to Greenland. He didn't land, but he saw forests on the horizon. Leif Ericson bought Bjarni's ship and set out to investigate. Around the year 1000 CE, Leif and his crew crossed the Labrador Sea and made landfall. This wasn't myth, it was fact. The Norse Saga, known as the Saga of the Greenlanders, tells of Leif's voyage, which was considered folklore for centuries. That changed in the 1960s when archaeologists Helga and Anne Stein Ingstead uncovered a Norse settlement at Landsaw Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. Carbon dating placed it around 1000 CE, the same time as Leif's alleged voyage. The structures they found, turf-covered buildings, iron nails, butternut remains, didn't lie. This was not just a landing, this was a settlement. So what did Leif and his crew find in this strange forested land? The sagas mention 3 territories. Helgeland, believed to be Baffin Island, cold, rocky, and barren. Markland, likely modern-day Labrador, thick with trees, ideal for shipbuilding timber. And Vinland, the most mysterious, described as a land of wild grapes, mild weather, and good pastures. Could this have been Newfoundland? Or did they reach farther south, perhaps even into New England? Some researchers suggest they may have traveled as far south as Nova Scotia or Maine, supported by findings of butternuts, native to more temperate climates, at the Landsaw Meadows site. Leif called it a land so good that cattle could feed themselves in winter. But this wasn't a conquest, it was an expedition, exploratory, hopeful, and small. Leif returned to Greenland with news of Vinland, and the sagas say he brought back grapes and timber. He never returned himself, but others did. Still, the story of Leif Ericson stands as a testament to one of the boldest acts of exploration in human history. 5 centuries before Columbus, Norse sails fluttered in the winds of North America. But what came next was even more complex. Life in Vinland, the Norse and the first American contact zone. If Leif Ericson was the scout, his brother Thorvald was the settler, and perhaps the cautionary tale. According to the Saga of the Greenlanders, Thorvald Ericsson led the next expedition to Vinland. His goal? To stay longer, build outposts, explore, settle. But Vinland wasn't empty. The sagas mention encounters with people they called the Skraeling, a Norse word for wretches or foreigners. Modern historians believe these were likely the ancestors of the Beothuk of Newfoundland, or perhaps the Inuit or Mi'kmaq peoples, depending on the location and timing. The first encounters were cautious. Trade occurred. Exchanges happened, but tension rose. In one encounter, Thorvald's party attacked a group of sleeping natives. Shortly after, the Norse were ambushed. Thorvald was struck by an arrow and died, becoming the first European known to have died in North America. Let that sink in. Not a Spaniard, not an Englishman, a Viking. Conflict was a key reason the Norse never established permanent colonies in Vinland. They were skilled warriors, but they were vastly outnumbered. This wasn't a land to conquer with a dozen ships. It was a world already peopled, with strong, established societies. Still, the Norse kept trying. Thorfinn Karlsefni, an Icelandic merchant, led the most ambitious colonization effort around 1010 CE, bringing around 160 settlers, men, women, and children. This was no scouting trip. This was an attempt to build a Norse world. They stayed for several years. They built homes, harvested timber, possibly even raised livestock. A woman named Gudrid gave birth to a son, Snorri, who was believed to be the first European child born in the Americas. But again, relations with local tribes soured. After several skirmishes, Karlsefni decided to retreat. Vinland, for all its promise, was too dangerous. So what did the Norse find in America? More than wood and grapes, they found something that stunned them. Other people. Organized, resistant, proud. This wasn't an empty continent waiting for discovery. It was already spoken for. And that lesson, learned the hard way, echoed through the sagas for centuries. That's perhaps why the Viking presence in America was short-lived. But make no mistake, these were not failures. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were traders, explorers. They mapped coastlines. They made first contact. They sailed from Norway to America with only the stars, the sun, and iron will. In their short time in Vinland, they laid the first European footprint on the continent. And while they didn't stay, their legacy lingers in turf ruins, sagas, and maybe even the DNA of coastal tribes. Myths, maps, and mysteries. Did the Vikings travel farther than we think? Here's where the story gets juicy. Because for every archaeological fact about the Vikings in North America, there's a swirling sea of speculation, myths, and maybes. Did the Norse make it as far south as modern-day Maine, or farther? Did they leave behind clues in stone and story that we've misinterpreted or ignored? Let's start with the most famous and infamous artifact in the Viking in America controversy, the Kensington runestone. In 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman claimed to have discovered a 200-pound slab of stone tangled in tree roots on his farm in Kensington, Minnesota. Carved into the stone was a message written in runes, a script used by Norse peoples. The inscription told of a group of Norse explorers who reached inland North America in 1362, well over a century before Columbus. Sounds incredible, right? It was too incredible, say most scholars. Linguists and historians quickly pointed out problems. The runes were inconsistent with known 14th century carvings. Some characters weren't in use during that time, and parts of the inscription resembled modern Scandinavian dialects. Today, most academics consider the Kensington runestone a 19th century hoax, perhaps created by Scandinavian immigrants eager to link their heritage to America's founding myths. But the stone still has passionate defenders and remains on display in Alexandria, Minnesota, at a museum devoted to it. Then there's the Vinland map, which surfaced in the 1950s and appeared to show part of North America labeled Vinland in a map drawn before Columbus's voyages. It caused a sensation. For decades, its authenticity was hotly debated, but in 2021, researchers at Yale University concluded that the map was almost certainly a forgery. Analysis of the ink showed it contained modern titanium dioxide, a pigment not used until the 20th century. Still, the persistence of these artifacts in the public imagination says something. People want to believe the Vikings traveled farther, that they tracked inland and left behind clues on mountaintops and riverbanks, and that they were buried in the Midwest. And in fairness, not all the evidence is bunk. In the 1950s and again in the 1990s, Norse-style artifacts such as iron nails, a cloak pin, and whetstones were found along the Labrador and Newfoundland coasts. Some were confirmed Norse, others remain uncertain. And then there are the oral traditions. Some Native American and First Nations groups have legends that mention encounters with pale-skinned, boat-riding foreigners long before the 1500s. These accounts aren't conclusive, but align intriguingly with Norse descriptions of the Skraeling. One of the most intriguing finds is the butternut conundrum at Lanso Meadows. Butternuts don't grow in Newfoundland's climate. However, fragments were found at the site, suggesting that the Norse traveled south, perhaps into New Brunswick or even Nova Scotia. That opens the possibility that Vinland was not a single settlement, but a series of seasonal expeditions, an early version of supply chain management, Viking style. And that brings us to the real point. We may never know precisely how far the Norse traveled into North America, but that uncertainty, it's part of the allure. Every shoreline, every old carving, every rumor of a long-lost Viking sword sends imaginations into overdrive. While most ancient empires left their mark in temples and tombs, the Vikings left something more elusive, the thrill of possibility. Why we remember Columbus but forget Leif? Politics, pop culture, and Viking revival. You might ask, why isn't Leif Ericson on the cover of history books? Why do American students learn about Columbus Day but not Vinland? Why do we know more about a man who never set foot on mainland North America than one who likely explored it around 500 years earlier? The answer, unsurprisingly, isn't just about archaeology. It's about politics, identity, and myth-making. Let's start with Columbus. In the late 19th century, as America industrialized and waves of European immigrants poured into cities, the country needed a unifying story, a heroic origin. Enter Christopher Columbus. Though his voyages had little to do with the U.S. directly, Columbus became the perfect symbol for an emerging national narrative, bold, Christian, European. And as Italian immigrants faced discrimination, they rallied around Columbus as a symbol of Italian-American pride. President Benjamin Harrison declared the first Columbus Day in 1892, marking the 400th anniversary of his voyage. Leif Ericson, meanwhile, had no such political engine, at least not at first. But by the early 1900s, Scandinavian Americans began pushing back. In states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas, Nordic descendants argued that Leif, not Columbus, should be recognized as the true discoverer of America. Sculptures went up, societies formed. In 1925, President Calvin Coolidge acknowledged that Leif Ericson discovered America nearly 500 years before Columbus. Progress. But then came pop culture, and that's where things got weird. Columbus had parades, he had parochial schools, he had a holiday. Leif Ericson had sledgehammers and death metal. In the 20th century, Vikings became cartoonishly masculine, brutal raiders with horned helmets, which, by the way, were never historically accurate. Hollywood reinforced the image with films, and later, TV series like Vikings or The Last Kingdom portrayed Norsemen as feral, brooding anti-heroes. Some of it was fun, but much of it was nonsense. But the problem was this: the complexity of the Norse story in America got buried under muscle and myth. And then, the Viking image took an even more troubling turn in darker corners of modern culture. White nationalist groups began co-opting Viking symbolism to push false ideas of Nordic racial superiority. Runes became misused emblems. The saga of Leif Ericson, once a story of multicultural exchange and exploration, got twisted into a tale of racial conquest. That's not just inaccurate, it's dangerous. Because the real Vikings weren't isolationists. They were connectors, traders, negotiators. They had Arab coins in their pouches and Irish slaves on their ships. They borrowed, blended, and adapted wherever they went. Their voyages to America weren't about domination. They were about discovery. They didn't plant flags. They planted curiosity. And that's the version of the Viking story we need to remember, one rooted in the courage to sail beyond the map. In recent years, there's been renewed effort to reclaim this narrative. In 1964, the U.S. officially recognized October 9th as Leif Ericson Day, commemorating his contributions to exploration. Museums and scholars continue to investigate Norse presence in North America with fresh eyes, grounded in science, not politics. And bit by bit, the real story is resurfacing. A story of a people who dared to see what lay beyond the horizon. Conclusion. So, what did the Vikings find in America? They found land rich with timber, wild grapes, and promise, but also a land already claimed, fiercely defended, and culturally complex. They found opportunity and resistance. And while they didn't build a long-lasting colony, they left behind something even more fascinating: the first chapter in the story of European contact with North America. A chapter rooted in exploration, humility, and the limits of empire. Yet their story was nearly lost, buried under Columbus myths and Hollywood Vikings. Now we know better. The Vikings weren't just warriors, they were wanderers, builders, and parents. They crossed oceans with courage and curiosity, not to conquer, but to discover. And that's a legacy worth remembering, not just for Scandinavians, but for all Americans. Because the true story of the Vikings in America isn't about conquest, it's about the courage to sail into the unknown. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Vikings and their history, check out our book, Viking Sagas, the captivating tale of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, Lagertha, and more in their historical context. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.